Governance expert Professor Alex van den Heever holds the chair in the field of social security systems administration and management studies at Wits School of Governance. He joins us now to speak to us about the latest political developments in our country. A very good evening to you, Professor, and thank you so much for speaking to us. So, we just heard commentary from one of the market watchers there saying that the market reacted to the uncertainty of President Cyril Ramaphosa's possible resigning in the manner that he did because he's seen as a market-friendly leader. But for South Africans, why does all of this matter? What is a seemingly personal business of the president of the country, why are we all on tenterhooks? Why is it so important and a statement on our constitutional democracy?
I think there are a number of issues, and I think that the market concerns are not merely because the president is seen as market friendly, but because of the consequences of a very problematic succession to somebody else at the helm. And I think it's very important to understand that the position of the president is incredibly powerful within government and within South Africa. And the risk that a problematic president poses to the stability of South Africa as a whole is the concern that essentially the markets were reacting to, and many other people as well. And so what we've come through in the past few years is a process of systemic state capture, structural state capture in South Africa that was being pushed to the side for a period, and now it looks as though they could return. And I think that is the fear, and that fear and the destruction that occurred to state institutions in South Africa will wreak havoc in South Africa's economy and society. And that is a real fear that exists. And so that is the threat that faces us. So on the one hand, we have a dalliance that the president has potentially engaged in, being used as a way to threaten the stability of South Africa as a whole, in that is being used as the lever to get him out in order for people who really don't care about the constitution, the rule of law, democracy in South Africa, and the stability of South Africa. They care potentially only about themselves. And that is a severe risk. And that is generally how people are seeing this issue.
You speak about the structural risk of our governmental architecture. And I want to look at the country's public sector, for instance. Is it partly to blame for the fractious political squabbles and infighting, but more importantly, is the current model vulnerable to inefficiency and corruption?
Oh, very much so. And unfortunately, not enough has been focused on to change in the sort of post-state capture period, because there is still very substantial patronage and capture within the system. And it largely stems from the ability of a dominant political party or any political party to appoint people in to the administrations, into parastatals. And so, for instance, the state-owned corporation model that we have involves a government minister appointing a board and appointing the chief executive effectively and being able to fire them all at the same time. That is a very, very poor model and lends itself to easy capture of organizations that have massive resources, not only resources through procurement, through spending, but also through employment, the ability to appoint thousands of people into these structures as part of a patronage pattern, rather than because they're actually trying to run these organizations properly. So this is incredibly dangerous to the coherence of performance. So an organization like Eskom has basically been brought to its knees by that. And so has South African Airways, so has PRASA, so has, or virtually the post office. Any number of parastatals have been destroyed by this model. It can't work. So we need to basically restructure the what I'd call the public entity governance component of many of these organizations. And we have to sever the link between the executive of government and the administration of government. And if we were wise, our electoral reform would also be dealing with creating a greater connection between people and the people who are representing us in government.
And I want to, because of what you're saying, Professor, I want to then walk back to South Africa's current intergovernmental architecture. It was an important element of the country's successful post-apartheid transition. But did that vision have an inherent sell-by date which we have failed to see or implement?
Yes, I think that the key component or key failure of it was that we allowed the provinces to become great big piggy banks, and they have actually fostered political patronage. It's the way in which you get promoted within a dominant political party, and through the use of state resources. And that has been the problem that is created. If we had tweaked the democracy differently, we would be compelling political competition based on policy and not based on bribing people. And unfortunately, that's the model we built up. And if you have to look at a lot of the people in the ANC at the top end of it, a lot of them are people that have emerged from the provinces out of, in many cases, a cesspool of corruption. And they are the leaders of the organization. And that's a real problem. That's why the international markets look at the potential succession with the possibility of rotten leaders who might take over. And once that happens, we may never get South Africa back again. So this is a crucial moment that has to be handled incredibly carefully because we have these weaknesses. But we should be correcting our electoral system.
But how to correct that? Because as you say, the provinces themselves, and just in terms of framework and language, they are federal in nature. But if you look at local government, for instance, if we're talking about inefficiency, if we're talking about corruption, it's been said a great deal of it, a significant portion of it happens at that level. So then how do we then remodel?
So there are aspects that are remodeling, but we must also take into account that a lot of our normal accountability structures were destroyed and are in the process of being rebuilt. They're nowhere close to being able to deal with the scale of corruption that is occurring in many cases. But we do have we had those institutions. So our investigative, our prosecutorial structures, our justice system are important components, not the only ones. Then there is local accountability, the ability of a community to hold their representatives to account. So we've got the mix. But what we did was we allowed essentially people to stay in positions of public authority despite having been fingered in corruption. So this impunity was permitted because they were protected by a very dominant party, which in some cases could be operating regionally and in other cases at a national level. And that has become part of the problem, is that the corrupt individuals don't go away. They stay, they deepen, they learn more how to steal. And we're not arresting them and we're not stopping them from appearing somewhere else in the state, even if they do get thrown out by some sort of a decent accountability system. The PFMA has not been, the Public Finance Management Act, has not been used very effectively up until now, despite the fact we've got a legislative framework to deal with accounting officers that fail to do their job. And you've got numerous cases where the accounting officer is directly implicated. Digital Vibes is a key example. The accounting officer gets let off the hook despite rigging a tender and for a minister. So this is the kind of thing that we're seeing. Nobody gets held to account, and that becomes part of the culture of the top part of the state. It's incredibly dangerous. And unfortunately, that dynamic has driven who gets to be a leader, at least not a true leader, but in leadership positions. And as a consequence, they hold the reins of power. And when we do need to change the constitution or change aspects of the government structure, unfortunately, we end up being in the position where we have to have turkeys voting for Christmas, because the people benefiting from the weaknesses in the state are now the people who we have to work with in order to change the state itself. We look at the Electoral Act. The Electoral Act is being sabotaged by national government. And this is something that is very important, was identified in commissions of inquiry as critical to correcting some of the flaws in our electoral framework. So these are parts of the correctives that now need to move forward.
Thank you so much for your time. Much appreciated for your insight. Governance expert, Professor Alex van der Heever. He holds the chair in the field of Social Security Systems Administration and Management Studies at Wits School of Governance.